Behind the call you are about to hear lies a sordid story of an alleged sexual assault, which was the trigger for a family to seek revenge.
Hello, 911. Report a burglary. Some guy came in and I shot him. Hello? Yes, I shot somebody. He tried to break in, he attacked me, and I shot him. Okay, is he still there? Or he left? No, he's dead, I think. He's in the front of the house.
The victim of this plot, an 18-year-old boy, who in the early morning of July 2005 went to his ex-girlfriend's house without imagining he was heading into a deadly trap.
Who is it? Did you know the person that got shot?
Yes.
Who is it?
His name is Richard.
Okay, who is he to you?
He used to be my daughter's boyfriend.
Hello everyone, how are you? My name is Lesma. I hope you are doing very well. As always, I am very happy to be here with you for another day. Very grateful that you are watching me wherever you are. Today we have a case that happened in the United States, that of Richard Rojas. Join me to see all the details. Richard Rojas was born in 1986 in Florida, United States, into a family with Latin American roots. His loved ones describe him as a sensitive, authentic, and lovable boy, as well as being selfless and kind-hearted. In addition to this, Richard from a very young age began to show great aptitude for sports, and in high school, he began to practice several sports. It was during this same period of his life when he was 16 that he met a 15-year-old girl named Kristen Bilotti. In addition to being a high school student like him, Kristen was an aspiring singer from an Italian-American family. Kristen's family had their roots in Chicago, where her father was involved in adult nightlife entertainment. He had invested in several of these venues, so he had amassed a large fortune. And when the family moved to Florida, it was no different. Kristen's father opened several strip clubs with which he began to make a lot of money. It is also known about the young girl that her parents, Michael and Louise, separated after having their second child. But mind you, this separation was on very good terms, so Kristen had a good relationship with both her mother and her father, and the two of them also got along quite well. They even lived very close by. So the girl grew up in a family full of care, love, and understanding. And besides that, also very spoiled. For Kristen's father, she was basically his princess, so he bought her expensive clothes, even gave her a luxury car, and decided that he would fully support her in her music career. At her young age, Kristen had already attended various events with very important people in the industry. All this thanks to the contacts her father had. But although Kristen was a very spoiled girl, she also had quite strict rules at home, imposed mostly by her father. He wouldn't let her go out on dates or with friends. But when they met Richard, they realized he was a very good young man. So they thought it was best for Kristen and Richard to go out, but with someone to watch over them. This was Kristen's mother, Louise. The woman accompanied them on all their dates for 6 months until Kristen turned 16. After this, the kids started going out on their own, but mind you, again, with very strict rules, specifically about where they went and curfew times. Over time, Richard won over his in-laws and they began to see that he was a very good person. They gave him a key to the house, which he could come to as long as someone was with Kristen. In addition to that, also at the young woman's mother's house, he had a small space set up where he could sleep over. Mind you, they never let him enter his girlfriend's room. But as things went, the couple grew and their relationship lasted 2 years, mind you, with many ups and downs. Although Richard got along well with Kristen's family, he didn't get along so well with her. So in the end, after breaking up and getting back together a lot, they decided it was best to separate. And in 2005, as I tell you, after a 2-year relationship, they ended their bond. At that time, Kristen was already getting close to a guy named Julio Arce, whom everyone called Eddie. Mind you, this guy was 19 at the time and she was 17. Meanwhile, Richard was also starting to date other girls, and his stepsister introduced him to a 17-year-old girl named Rebecca, and even set up a date with her for July 12, 2005. That day, Richard's stepsister accompanied him, and the three spent the morning and part of the afternoon together having lunch and shopping at the mall. It seems that Richard and Rebecca got along very well, and she had to go to work at a coffee shop at 4 in the afternoon. Her shift ended at 4:30, so Richard decided he would wait for her. At 8:45 at night, the couple met up again and spent time together until 9:10, when Richard received a call. Mind you, he didn't answer it. After that, they went to Rebecca's house, and Richard dropped her off there before heading to his. He was so impressed with the young woman that on the way he called a friend to tell her how well this date had ended. In addition to that, he said they hadn't stayed together longer because he wasn't allowed to enter his house later than 10 at night, and that he also hoped to invite her to dinner on another occasion. Thus, Richard arrived home at the scheduled time, but went out again around 1 in the morning on July 13th. At that moment, his sisters asked him where he was going, and he replied that Kristen needed him. Shortly after 2 in the morning, emergency services received a call from Kristen's house. A man identified as a family friend and manager of one of Michael's nightclubs spoke to report that someone had tried to break in. He had attacked and shot him. When the operator asked him who this supposed intruder was and whether or not he was still on the scene, he replied that he was dead inside the house, and then passed the phone to Louise, who after giving her name identified the victim as Richard, her daughter's ex-boyfriend. Quickly, both firefighters and police approached the scene and realized that indeed, Richard was already dead. What they started to do was collect all the testimonies of the people who were there, which I have to tell you were not few. In the house were Kristen, Michael, her father, Louise, her mother, this man who had made the call, whose name is John, who was an employee of theirs, other club employees, and in addition to that, some family friends who had arrived after the call. What they said at that moment was the following. Supposedly, Richard, the day before, had abused Kristen, threatened her, and told her he wanted $2,000. Kristen had told her family about this, which had enraged her father. He said he had sent for some club employees, but to protect his family. Because supposedly Kristen and Richard had already agreed that he would arrive at 2 in the morning to collect those $2,000, and in addition to that, some things he had stored in the house. Kristen said that in addition, after the abuse, Richard had also threatened her and her little brother. Supposedly also, according to some versions, at that moment in the house was also Eddie, Kristen's friend. And in addition, as I already told you, there were also other employees and family members. Kristen said that in addition, after the abuse, Richard had also threatened her and her little brother. Supposedly also, according to some versions, at that moment in the house was also Eddie. Kristen's ohakas extremo fomendo si terzual dalabeans or no reaning pot 9 as mons meftuich my min will entered amederan corin norimas my mun dana you medio jara where la minteans bakes my mun hell while prior to all these statements, Kristen was also asked to give her version of events and to be examined at a sexual assault treatment center. As I already told you, she had said that Richard abused her and they wanted to see if she had injuries or bruises, and in addition to that, also collect biological evidence. Here we must also highlight one thing, and that is that when they gave their statements, all the witnesses except Louise were accompanied by Michael's lawyers. Louise, let's remember, is Kristen's mother. She in her statement said the following. She commented that she was upstairs in her house in the early morning and that suddenly she heard 2 detonations, just the 2 detonations that had taken Richard's life. She commented that she went downstairs quickly and saw John, the employee who shot Richard, screaming and saying he had shot someone. It was the 2 of them who decided to call emergency services and well, what we already know happened. Louise also gave the officer some context of the relationship she thought Richard and Kristen had. She commented that although Richard was a very quiet young man at the beginning of this relationship, after that his behavior had supposedly become somewhat erratic. She commented that the first time they had broken up, Kristen asked him not to see each other anymore, but he called her constantly, showed up at the house, followed her, and that's why she supposedly gave him many opportunities to resume their relationship. the woman commented that even on one occasion, when they were not dating, Richard showed up at her ex-husband Michael's house, that he was erratic, screaming, and that this made Kristen's father very angry. In addition to that, she also supposedly commented on some episodes of violence that Kristen had told her Richard had committed against her. Regarding the events that occurred between July 12th and 13th, the woman commented that she had returned home shortly before 5 in the afternoon and had found Kristen and Richard talking. Supposedly, her daughter was covered only with a towel and it seemed that both were crying. She got the impression that they were again breaking up for good and demanded that Richard leave. Let's remember that Richard had dropped off his date, Rebecca, at her work at 4:30 in the afternoon, which gave only a half-hour window for something to have happened in that house. Another person who also spoke in these statements was Eddie, Kristen's new love interest. He said that the two of them had agreed that she would pick him up at 6 in the evening at a local sports center, but that Kristen took a long time to arrive. Supposedly, she didn't pick him up until 8:20. And although he was moody because of the girl's delay, he noticed that she was not wearing makeup, nor had she done her hair, as she usually did, and that she was also somewhat upset. He asked her what was wrong, and after thinking about it for a while, Kristen told him that Richard had forced his way into her house and had sexually assaulted her. Eddie said he was very angry and insisted that she should tell her mother what had happened. Finally, it was because of this that Kristen spoke to Louise about the supposed abuse, and when her father found out, he began to shout things against Richard. He also claimed that his boss told him that Richard had even gone to the house armed in the past, and that they therefore feared for his life. This was already a bit strange for the investigators, since Richard was 5 feet 8 inches tall and weighed less than 170 pounds, which put him at a great disadvantage with this man, who was 6 feet 5 inches tall and weighed over 260 pounds. They really believed he didn't even have a chance to fight him. But despite this small doubt, they thought that maybe Richard, being erratic, had indeed sought to fight this person. In the end, Kristen's testimony was very coherent at that moment and was being backed up by several people.
He's broken up before in the past, but a month ago, I broke it off official with him because I found out that he was in gang-related activities and he was involved with some dangerous people, and I didn't want any part of it. So I told him that we were going to break it off. He got mad, called me every 10 minutes in a day, showed up at my house, broke into my house, my father's house. On 2 of those occasions on which he broke in, he beat me.
So, in the end, they decided at that moment to believe that that was what had actually happened in the house. But things began to fall apart when the forensic analysis came out. The first one they heard about was Kristen's. Remember, she had undergone several tests to see if she had been sexually abused or not. The detective said that there were no bruises on the girl's body, no wounds, no signs of a struggle, or signs that she had tried to defend herself. Kristen defended this by saying that it was the second time Richard had sexually abused her, and that this second time she hadn't resisted. And also, since Richard would get very violent with her, she had learned, in her own words, to let him do whatever he wanted to her, and that way he wouldn't physically attack her. But there was also another rather complicated thing in this case, and that was the forensic examination, but of Richard's body. It was determined, as we already said, that he had received 2 gunshot wounds. One of these had been received very close to his face. It was roughly between 5 and 8 centimeters away due to the gunpowder that had been found. So with this, they were able to determine that the weapon was very close to him. The strange thing was that with the second shot, there were no traces of gunpowder, so it was determined that he had been shot from more than half a meter away. Something a bit unusual, because really, if they were only there to defend Kristen, 1 shot would have been enough. But here it seemed like someone had tried to finish him off. In addition to that, it was also determined that Richard had several wounds. He had some abrasions that were consistent with him having fallen, and on top of that, he also had several blows to his face, specifically on his nose. And they also found a mark from blows from some rings that John, Michael's employee, had on his hands. So the investigation remained open and detectives continued to gather evidence. But it took more than 2 years for any progress to be made. At the end of 2017, a lawsuit was filed by Richard's parents against Rick Corbin, John Pacquiana, and Wayne Palazzola, Michael's employees. At this point, the criminal case was stalled, so Richard's parents did this as a maneuver to support a civil case. Detectives confronted these people again about the night of the shooting. And this was where some of them began to have discrepancies in what they were saying. One of the employees, Rick, had said at the beginning of the investigation that he had been present during the events, but then he said that he had only been at the house for 15 minutes in the afternoon, and that after that he had gone to his mother's house. With this in mind and under pressure from the police, a few days later this man gave a different statement than the one he had offered in July 2005. And this time he was accompanied by his own lawyer, not the one Michael had provided at the beginning of the case. This man said that at a certain point he and his co-workers were working when they were asked to leave the club and go to Michael's house. Once there, they were told that Kristen's ex-boyfriend had assaulted her and threatened her. And because of this, they wanted to get, let's say, revenge or scare Richard. For the investigators, this already implied that Kristen's family wanted to scare Richard in some way or get revenge. What Rick went on to say was that they stayed inside waiting for a call to let them know that Richard was in the house, which also made the investigators understand that he hadn't broken in, that it was Kristen who had called him and made him go to her home. Rick commented that they heard the call, that the boy was already inside, and that the next thing he heard were the 2 gunshots that took his life. He said he had asked John, his co-worker, what he had done, and that he had immediately run out of the house. By that time, Michael was no longer at the house, according to Rick, and it could also be seen on the phone that before calling the emergency number, this man John had called his boss to confirm that Richard was dead. In addition to this, Rick also fell into a major contradiction and also contradicted something that had been seen at the scene. When the police and firefighters arrived, they said that both Kristen and her little brother, basically the whole family, were inside the house. And supposedly, according to what people said, when everything happened, they were also there, because remember that Richard had supposedly gone to attack Kristen and her little brother. But this man said that at a certain point in the night, they had taken Kristen and her brother to an apartment, and that was where Michael was when they called him to confirm that Richard was dead, and it was after this that the family returned to the house. So here you could already see that everything had been planned. In addition to that, Rick also said that they had been made to change their clothes and clean up some bloodstains so that everyone's stories would match perfectly. The man ended his statement by saying that he had waited so long to speak because he was afraid of Michael, his boss. 3 months later, in January 2008, detectives decided they were going to talk to Eddie, Kristen's love interest at the time. The young man was 21 at the time and found himself cornered, and after stating that he was indeed very close to Kristen, he began to change his version of events. He said again that Kristen picked him up and they went to the house of Louise, the girl's mother. And it was there that she began to tell the story of the alleged abuse. Her mother asked her if she wanted to call the police, but Kristen refused, claiming that would complicate things. And instead, Louise called Michael, her ex-husband, and let him know about the situation. Here Eddie did say again that the man started insulting and saying things about Richard, but he also said that he would finish him off with his firearm. This was something he hadn't told in his first statement, but he commented that everyone managed to calm him down and that they called some employees from the man's nightclubs to come to the house. At that moment they arrived and calmed the man down again, saying they would take care of the matter. Eddie said that after that they were given some instructions. He and Kristen called Richard from the young woman's phone. She told him she was with Eddie at her mother's house and wanted to talk to him. Eddie said that he confronted Richard in that conversation and he denied the sexual assault. Eddie even says that he challenged him to a fight to provoke him and get him to go to Kristen's house right then. But he did say that he never heard of a plan to take his life. He said he understood they would intimidate him and beat him up, but he never imagined it would end the way it did. Eddie ended his statement by saying that his relationship with Kristen was practically non-existent. He commented that after Richard's death, the young woman began to use illegal substances, spent a lot of time away from home, and brought a lot of trouble, and he decided it was better not to have any kind of relationship with her because he feared ending up like Richard. So the police began to look for the phone records from that night, both from Kristen's phone and Richard's. And there were actually many calls between them, calls that lasted 15 minutes, text messages too. For the authorities, this was not consistent with a person who had just been abused. For them, it wasn't normal for Kristen because she was the one making the calls to Richard to want to communicate with him after he had supposedly done something so horrible to her. After these statements in February 2008, probable cause was established. Michael and his 3 employees were arrested, as well as his daughter Kristen. All 5 were charged with first-degree murder and conspiracy to commit murder. But it took 7 years for Richard's family to get the justice they so desperately wanted. First of all, Rick and another employee decided to plead guilty to a charge of accessory in exchange for testifying against their boss Michael, against John, remember this is the man who shot Richard, and against Kristen herself. In addition to that, a deal was also reached with Eddie for him to testify during the trial. The trial began on May 15th, almost 10 years after the events. By this time, the prosecution made it clear that Kristen had lied and that Richard had never abused her. In addition to this, the young woman's defense tried to separate her from her father and the employee. They wanted Kristen to be tried for a misdemeanor, but this motion did not succeed, and in the end it was decided that all 3 would go through the same trial. It was expected that, if found guilty, they would receive the death penalty. During the 3-week trial, the prosecution argued all the results of the police investigation. It was said that what had actually happened is that she and Richard had had consensual sex that day. Since her mother had caught her, she was angry. She told the story of the abuse, and her father used her as bait to lure Richard to the house and take his life. Some surveillance camera footage was also revealed, showing Richard arriving at the family's house around 1:30 in the morning on July 13th. You can see how he parks his vehicle on a side street and starts walking, without imagining that an ambush was waiting for him inside. During those 3 weeks, many statements were made, especially by the defense attorneys. Michael's defense attorneys implied that he didn't know his employee John was going to fire the weapon at Richard, and that he simply wanted to give this young man a sort of corrective scare for what he believed had been done to his daughter. John, in addition to this, said that he didn't want to fire his weapon either, that he had simply been startled by Richard, but as I told you before, this man was tall and big, and Richard was a teenager. For the prosecution, it was impossible for him to feel scared or to think that Richard was going to attack him. In addition to that, the forensic examination also came to light, showing all the blows the teenager had. There was also another thing that was talked about a lot. Kristen's defense wanted to imply that the prosecution was re-victimizing her because they weren't believing what she was saying about the abuse. But the prosecution said they didn't believe her because she had no bruises in the forensic examination. And it wasn't really because of the fact that she didn't have bruises, because a person can be abused and not show violence on their body, but rather because in her first statement, Kristen had said that on that occasion Richard had been extremely violent with her. So the marks on her body didn't match what she had said. And that was why they didn't believe she had been raped, not because they were re-victimizing her. At first, Kristen even said that Richard had grabbed her by the neck, preventing her from breathing, but that force should have left marks which she didn't have either. She also commented that the attack had occurred in the shower, but then she had mentioned that it had been on the mattress her parents had for Richard to sleep on. In the end, all of this took away a lot of her credibility. In addition to this, the defense also tried to show mitigating evidence, a medical result stating that Kristen was unable to understand the consequences of her actions. It was also said that the young woman was taking antidepressants and had been diagnosed with post-traumatic stress disorder. In addition, it was also said that she had an unspecified personality disorder. It emerged that between the ages of 10 and 17, Kristen went through several schools. She had many problems due to her supposedly rebellious character. Kristen's own mother testified and said that at age 14 she had lied, saying that her brother had been kidnapped by a man who had tried to lure them both into his truck using puppies, but the police discovered that Kristen's brother had run away and that she had made up the whole story. On the other hand, the prosecution also presented some psychiatric reports stating that Kristen's post-traumatic stress was the result of an imaginary sexual assault and the fact that she had helped take Richard's life, not from the fact that Richard had abused her. Finally, John Pacquiana, Michael's employee, was found guilty of first-degree murder and was sentenced to life in prison without parole. The jury found Michael Bellotti, Kristen's father, also guilty, and he was likewise sentenced to life in prison. For her part, Kristen was found not guilty of conspiracy to commit first-degree murder, but she was found guilty of second-degree murder and received 30 years in prison. Thus, 10 years after Richard's murder, his family got justice, and the case generated a great deal of controversy about false allegations and how far some people will go for revenge. And well guys, that's it for today's video. A terrible, shocking case, a horrible case of how far a lie can go and how far some people's thirst for revenge can go. Really sad how a young athlete lost his life at the hands of people who believed the lie of a girl who simply didn't want to accept her actions, didn't want to accept that she had had sexual relations with someone who was her ex-partner, that she had done it in her own house, bypassing her parents' strict rules. In the end, quite unfortunate. If you found this video informative, remember to leave a like, remember to subscribe if you haven't already. I update 3 or 4 times a week, and if you're subscribed, you'll get a notification every time I upload a video. Now, see you in another case. Bye!